But we started a series a few weeks ago called Make Room. Super excited about this one. Is we're really looking at the reality of what it looks like and what it means to kind of make room in our hearts, in our lives, and make space to kind of to hear from Jesus, make space to think, to get some perspective on our lives. And we said in a world that is super distracted and super busy, loud, busy, hurried, kind of stressed, the discipline of saying, you know what, I'm going to push pause. I'm going to make some space right here, and I'm going to allow God to interact with my heart and my mind is becoming an incredibly important practice. And so we wanted to talk about some different ways that we can make room in this series and spend a little time doing that. So the first week we talked about rest a little bit, just kind of the big idea and the concept of it. And then last weekend we talked about joy and delight, how to kind of embrace the gifts that God has given us and say thank you for those gifts. And then this week what we're going to do is really take a look at our actual thought life, right? What's going on in our minds? Where's our attention going? John, we had a guest speaker last weekend. What he said, if you want to catch these online, you can on our YouTube channel, on our website. He quoted somebody and it said, kind of that what really drives our life are our strongest thoughts. We want to kind of pick up on some of that idea today and take a look at what am I being driven by? Where are my thoughts going? And sometimes it's hard to even see what's going on in our minds and where our attention is being spent. But I think we're going to see today as we spend a little time here that this is actually the core of what drives change in our lives and renewal. It's actually where really any life change is going to start. And a bunch of us in here to there just came through, and right, if you're just jumping in with us, a bunch of us made a decision to say, you know what, I am committed to growing. I don't want to stay here in my spiritual journey, right? So even if you're here and you're not a believer, not a Christ follower, I would highly encourage you maybe to be open to the conversation today, because really any movement that might happen is going to start by me asking some really important reflective questions and allowing that room to be made for change and right, if you're open to a relationship with God, for God to make an impact on you. So we're going to dive in here to a passage that is super powerful and maybe familiar to some of us. Romans chapter 12, verses 1 and 2. Love this set of scripture. The Apostle Paul, leader in the early church, is speaking here, and here's what he says. He says, therefore, I urge you, brothers and sisters, in view of God's mercy, to offer your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and pleasing to God. He says, this is your true and proper worship. Goes on, he says, don't conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Then you'll be able to test and approve what God's will is, his good, pleasing, and perfect will. All right, so let's unpack this a little bit. Paul's going to say, hey, God, in view of God's mercy, in view of the reality of what God has done, we are going to respond out of that reality and out of what God has accomplished. And as we begin to think about what we think about, Paul's going to start here and say, basically saying, I want you to renew your minds. I want you to look back and look at who God is, look at what God has done, and in view of all of that, that is what's going to cause you, it wasn't the best circle I've ever drawn, right? That is going to cause you to take a different look at your responsibilities. Your responsibilities. That he's going to say, I want you to offer your bodies as a living sacrifice in view of who God is, who he has been, and the mercy that he has brought to your life. Now, if we were to take a bunch of time, and we're not going to take an enormous amount of time today, but if we were to take a bunch of time and look back in this letter that Paul wrote to the Romans, what we would find is an unbelievable journey of God's endless mercy to his people. Endless. And what we're going to see is over and over, as the people that God created rejected him, pushed him away, stiff-armed him, God continued to offer himself and ultimately would offer himself in the person of Jesus. Right? And here's what, right, in essence, here's what Jesus did, is Jesus would come to the planet and put skin on and enter into our brokenness as kind of the climax, the peak of God's mercy for us. And what he would do is he would enter into a system that he created, and he would perfectly execute that. He would master, he would live righteously. He would live perfectly. He would never sin. Something that no human being has ever been able to do. And then as he did that, he then, as the perfect human, would then offer his body as a sacrifice for you and I, who could never accomplish that on our own. Jesus gave himself. The Bible would say that he was the sacrificial lamb. He's the Lamb of God. And the Old Testament would talk about how these lambs would be offered over and over for sacrifice for sin. And Jesus would be the lamb, kind of the ultimate lamb, that would offer himself once and for all as the sacrifice for all sin. Willingly, he does this. Innocently, he lays himself down. And then he beats death, rises from the dead, and then he offers forgiveness and life and relationship back to God to anybody who would have faith in him. Paul's going to lay all that out and more in those first 11 chapters. And then he comes to Romans 12:1. It says, in view of God's mercy, in view of all that God has done, look at what he has done in Jesus. You and I say thank you to all of that by offering I love this, offering ourselves. So here's how we can say thank you. I can't earn it. I can't pay it back. I can't be a good enough person. I'm only made right with God through faith. It's the only way that anybody's ever made right with God. So the only thing I can really do is look at God and say, God, thank you. Thank you for doing for me what I could absolutely never do for myself. And how can I do that? What does God want from me? I love this. This is surprising. More than religious duty, more than money, more than trying to be a good person, what God actually wants is me. He actually wants me. He wants my heart and my mind, my attention, my focus, my thoughts. He wants me. In fact, the Bible, this is amazing. The Bible actually says that God is jealous for me. That there's a jealousy that's actually a good kind of jealousy. Right? Like a husband and wife are jealous for one another. If one was to drift in affection for someone else, it would be a good kind of jealous that they would want that person to be drawn back into a relationship. In the same way, God looks at us and he says, I'm jealous for your attention. I'm jealous for your affection and for your focus. I want relationship with you. And I've gone to incredible, merciful lengths to make that possible. And so how do we say thank you? By offering ourselves, our bodies as this living sacrifice back to God. And then he really dives deeper into it and he says, no, I don't conform to the pattern of this world. He says, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. And this is such a loaded statement that I think it'll probably take the rest of my life to really understand, and maybe even more than understand, but to practice what Paul's talking about here. But he says, as you do that, as you resist, another translation or paraphrase this is, don't let the world squeeze you into its mold. As I resist being squeezed into the mold that the world is going to naturally press me into, and I choose instead to set my thoughts here on who God is, what he's done, and then my response to him, right? Here's me, right? I'm looking first here, and I'm setting and fixing my attention on the, right, on the who, on the what God has done, right? And the bleed of God's mercy into my life, and that bleed into how that affects and empowers and supports how I live for God and how I engage my life. I'm going to stare at that. And as I do that, the Bible's going to say my mind is renewed. I see life differently, right? There's an aha moment, right? I look at life and I say, you know what, this is different than I thought it was. I can approach life with a different freedom and a different set of expectations and hopes, with a different room, with a different peace, because of what God has done for me and how I can live for him. That becomes my focus. Now, if we were to continue to go out here, we might make a few more circles, and eventually what will happen is this will bleed out as I think about my response to God and my responsibilities in response to who he is, right, as a living sacrifice. I'm going to look at my marriage or my singleness or how I approach work or school or volunteering, whatever I'm doing. And I'm going to approach my days and my minutes and my hours and my years. And I'm going to look and say, God, how do I give myself and give my life to you? As I do that, that's going to pour out over into the lives of other people. It's going to bleed, and I'm going to start to ask the question next, how can my life be a blessing to others? And then, right after I do all that, maybe there's some time to think every once in a while about things that are beyond my control. Now, the pattern of this world kind of flips the script on this. The pattern of the world is going to draw my attention here first, to stare at things that are beyond my control. There's an emergency. There's a political problem. There's an economic problem. Everything right here's all these things that are happening right now that you need to stare at and look at and you need to be aware of. And here's your attention. Did you know this isn't necessarily a terrible or evil thing? It's just something we need to be aware of. Do you know there's an entire economy built around getting your attention? It's called the attention economy. And it's literally the fight for your eyeballs and my eyeballs. If I can get, right, if somebody can get me to look longer and scroll deeper and click more on that link, there's a plan and a strategy and lots of financial resources, right, to get me to stare a little bit longer at something or click a little bit deeper. Because the longer I stay engaged, the more attention that I give, the more likely I'm going to buy stuff. Now, not all that's evil. I just should be aware of that. I should just be aware of that. Why? Because, hear me, in 2023, the most precious asset that I have, the most precious commodity that I have is my attention. I don't know if you've ever thought of it that way. Your attention and my attention, what I think about, what I'm focused on, where my mind is being spent, what I'm looking at is so valuable that companies all over the world are paying a whole lot of money to get a little bit of that. Why? Because that stuff matters a ton. And what's really important is it matters a ton to God. And what we're going to see, I hope, in this conversation is it matters a ton in my life. My attention being given to the things that God has called me to, my responsibilities, to the people he's called me to love. Giving my thoughts here first, and then here, and then here, in that order, will have an enormous and profound effect on the trajectory of how my life plays out. If I flip this and all of my time is going here, I'm worried about the future. I'm thinking about the regrets of the past. I'm worried about decisions someone else is going to make that I don't have any control over. I'm spending all my time here, and then if I have anything left, I might think a little bit about the mercies of God. What's going to end up happening is I'm going to be filled with an anxiousness and a helplessness that is not what God has called me to or freed me from. Game changer. Paul's going to say, don't be conformed to the pattern of this world. Be transformed by the renewing of our mind. I think most of that phrase, again, is loaded. It's been used in all kinds of ways to describe a whole bunch of things, but we can know from the context of the passage that he's talking about our minds. It's been used to talk about the kind of clothes we wear, the kind of hairstyles that we have, if we go to movie theaters or not, right? You guys have heard this stuff, right, over the decades or centuries if you've been in the church for a while. I didn't grow up in church, and so I missed a lot of this, but this is what I've heard, right? Some of you heard all that. Is that what the pattern of the world is? That you should look like, you're from Amish country, right? And that's fine, right? Nothing wrong with that. Right? But is that the point, that if I wore a schmuck, that I would be more godly? I don't even know what a schmuck is, right? But I've heard it, right? Someone just laughed. I love it. Right? But do not be conformed to the pattern of the world. Be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Probably a good chunk of that has to do with going on with my attention and my focus. And Paul's going to tell us here, when I do this, when I live in view of God's mercy, when I offer myself as a living sacrifice, when I don't conform and get squeezed into the world's mold, then I'm going to be able to test and approve what God's will is. I'm going to be able to know what I should do, because I know whose I am, I know who I am, and I know what really matters. I can't get at that without a little bit of thought. Without a little bit of thought. I love this. This is a very familiar passage. We talk about this all the time. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment. This is what Jesus said in response to a question. And one of the things I think we have to recognize is that if we're going to be followers of Jesus, if we're going to be faithful to God, that it's going to have to involve my mind in a pretty real way. I'm going to have to do some thinking. And really, when this word mind really means all your understanding. All your understanding. Now I'm going to think about my life, and I'm going to think, God, how do I love you with all of myself? This is what separates us from other creatures, is that we have the ability to get above our lives and look at them and be proactive and be intentional and to think about where we're headed and where we've been and what matters and what, right? It's not all just instinct. We have the ability to get above it and to think and to ask those questions. That matters a ton. And I just want to say it out loud because it's worth it. That work of making room and getting to some of those questions that make us maybe change course, maybe start a new habit, maybe delete stuff from our lives, maybe do something different. That work, that making room to think about that, is hard and uncomfortable work. I'm just going to say it, it's slightly painful. When I begin to get in there and start to do some of that and stare at some ugly things back at myself, I want to kind of make that go away and resist it. I don't know if that's ever how you have felt. Now, I want us to see that a reality here that just part of our world today that if we're going to look at making room and giving thought and living in view of God's mercy, how do we do it? And what are some maybe challenges to that? We probably need to talk about some of the reality of some of the distractions that are available in our midst today and that have become normal. And listen, these are not all evil things. They're just realities. Okay, these are just realities. Let me show you a few stats that I picked up. I'm sure if you went to 5 websites, you get 5 different stats, so just bear with me. These are just some examples. An average user of social media spends 2.5 hours a day on social media in 2022. 2.5 hours a day. Now, hear me. Some of that could be learning on YouTube. Some of that could be super productive stuff, right? So we're not going to demonize it. I just want us to be aware. And right, and some of us, we're going to hear that, and we're like, well, not me. You know, they have like stats in here now, which is really nice and slightly painful, right? I looked at mine recently again and was like, ouch, this is tough. And right, and a big piece of why I'm talking about this is I just want you, even before we open this all up, this has been incredibly challenging for me. And I said that we're talking about this because I've been more distracted and challenged by getting sucked into you name it, right? But there's an addictive quality to all of this that's fighting for my attention. So I'm bringing it up because I think it's a challenge for me. I bet it's maybe a challenge for you. 2.5 hours a day daily. Let's just do some math. Okay, there's 24 hours in a day. 2.5 hours. That's about what is that? Is that about 10%? 10% of a day. So if we spend 10, and that's with sleeping. But let's just include it. 10%, if I fan that out over 10 years, that's in a 10-year period, that's 1 year spent on social media in 10 years. An entire year of life spent doing what? What would I have to show for that 1 year of time invested? Now, some of it could be really good. Hear me. I'm not trying to demonize. I just want us to be aware. I want to make room right here, right now, to think about that. So that we might be intentional and ask the question, okay, if I'm going to do that, I want to do it on purpose. If I'm going to spend a year doing that, I want to have consciously chosen to have spent that year that way. What I don't want to do, and what I don't want to allow as one of your pastors and leaders in your lives is to allow that question to go unasked. That we could just ooze into losing a year in 10 potentially. Make sense? Huge. Look at some of these stats. Half an hour of time on our phones. 2022 is reserved for, I'm not sure. Half our time on phones in 22 is reserved for social media. The rest is, I don't know, I use my white noise machine. I use Outlook. I use other things. I use an alarm clock. Facebook is the most popular, costing people an average of 58 minutes a day. YouTube takes an average of 19 minutes daily. I think YouTube can be super helpful if you're looking to learn something. So that's a good positive one, good intentional one. Here's one. Kids spend an average of 91 minutes on TikTok. That's a lot. Users spend an average of 30 minutes per day on Snapchat. Snapchat's the one I just do not understand. I'm like, guys, I ask my kids this. I'm like, so you just take a picture of the corner of your face and you send it to people, and then they send you a picture back of the ceiling. I'm like, is there like a secret code? How does this thing work? I'm old. That's evidently what it is, right? 30 minutes Snapchat. Instagram users spend an average of 28 minutes on the platform daily. Right? So just some examples. I'm positive, as I said, if you went to a bunch of different places, you would find a bunch of different results for those. Here's all I really care about. I don't care so much about what the average is or what other people are doing. I care about what I'm doing, and I care about what you're doing, and I want us to consciously be choosing these things. Make sense? I want us to consciously be choosing. If I'm spending an hour on Facebook a day, I want it to be because I did it on purpose. Okay? And there's some great reasons to spend some time on Facebook. You want to get caught up on what's going on in people's lives and be able to, there's great reasons to do that. Let's do it on purpose. It's the drift and the ooze and the accidental that I want to bring up. And I think it's when we make room to ask the question, that's when I think the good stuff starts to happen. Right? Because think about it. What if we took just a little chunk of time? We would say 2.5 hours a day. What if we just took, 15 minutes, a half an hour, and we asked some open-ended questions about our responsibilities and about how God might help us to have those responsibilities play out differently? Could that be life-changing? Let me give you some examples. We've got, you know what, I'll throw them up here in my notes. They're not in yours. Here's one. Maybe if you're taking notes, jot these down. You might ask this question and really pray this prayer. Lord, help me to think through. Here's the question. Lord, help me to think through. What's the one thing I could do in my marriage or my singleness right now that would help me to be more faithful to you? What's one thing I could do right now to make my marriage more God-honoring, to improve it, or to be more faithful in being single and wholehearted, give myself to you? Here's what will happen if you spend 15 minutes, 20 minutes, half an hour just sitting with that question. It probably will only take maybe 5 or 10. Undistracted, notifications off, TV down, people away, pad of paper or just you want to type, whatever. That undistracted time of just sitting in that question, here's what's going to happen. You're going to feel uncomfortable. And then right away, I bet you within minutes, an idea that is obvious, right, as the day is long, will pop up and you go, man, if I did that, that would be a game changer. Literally will take very little time at all. And this is the stuff that's challenging to me is, when I look at how much time and intentionality goes into this, even right in my life, versus the distractions, the things that I drifted into on accident, sometimes it's painful. And a little bit of intentionality could really move the needle in my life in a way that it can be unbelievable. What's one thing I could do right now that would move the needle in my marriage or in my singleness, my devotion? Here's another question. What's one thing I could do right now, this week, to be more effective in glorifying God through my work? Through work, if you have a job, through school, if you're volunteering, whatever your work is, taking care of children at home, if you're staying home, whatever, taking home, caring for a parent at home. What's one thing I could do right now that would take my work to another level in bringing glory and honor to God? That question, right? That question sometimes goes unasked. Just a little bit of room to say, Lord, you laid your life down for me in Christ. I want to give myself back to you. And you have made me in your image and given me a mind. I'm going to make just a little bit of space and room to ask some really profound, important questions about how I can do that. Here's one for you if you're taking notes. What's one thing I can do right now that will lower my level of regret at the end of my days? What's one thing I can do right now that will lower my level of regret at the end of my days? When I come near the end of my life, something none of us like to think about. I'm not trying to be morbid, I'm trying to be honest. All of us are going to come near the end. As we draw near to the end, often what happens if somebody kind of knows that their end is nearing, all of a sudden, things become very clear that have been very blurry. Things become very important that have been deprioritized. Maybe it's forgiving somebody. Maybe it's taking a risk. Maybe it's bringing up a conversation that has been lying dormant and I know that it needs to be had. Maybe it's pursuing something that God has placed in my heart that I've been afraid of. Maybe it's looking somebody in the eye and telling them how much I appreciate them and love them. But what do we take here? 60 seconds to talk about that? How much might the needle move if instead of taking the path of least resistance and accidentally getting sucked into minutes and hours, getting siphoned out of my life, if that's what's happening, if I said, no, I'm going to kind of aggressively resist that, and I'm going to purposefully lean into pain and discomfort and stare at some questions that are frankly very uncomfortable now, but I'll be very, very glad about later. I'm bringing this up because this is important in my life, and I imagine it's important in yours. And I think the Lord longs for us to live out of this reality. What does a living sacrifice do? A living sacrifice lives as if there's someone who has already been given over. I'm somebody whose life is already done. And so everything I have is open-handed. I've sacrificed it already. Rather than being a martyr that gives themselves once and it is finished, I'm someone who offers myself daily and continues to live, but lives a ever martyred life. God, how do I offer myself to you? How do I live in such a way that when I see you face to face, I experience gladness and I experience your joy? Because I got into I made room and got into some uncomfortable spaces in my days here on earth. That's what we're talking about. Yeah, in my life, these things have proven to be disproportionately powerful. It doesn't make sense that 10 minutes equals this kind of movement, that 1 hour equals this kind of breakthrough. But it's a decision to say, you know what, I'm going to experience the discomfort and the awkwardness and the pain and the experiences of I feel like I should pick up my phone. All that's going to happen. But I'm going to lean into it. So what we did, guys, is as a takeaway, right? This is a big conversation. We put a tool together a handful of years ago that we've used at a few of our campuses, and I've been through it multiple times, and it has been extremely helpful to me. Simple. And all it really does is facilitate time with God, time for us to spend with God. And you can use this no matter where you are on the spiritual spectrum. You might not have any relationship with God. You might have known Jesus for 50 years. All it does is facilitate that quiet, alone time to make room. And here's the idea, it is really, you should probably set aside an hour maybe even up to 90 minutes. That's a lot of time, I know. It's really not. It's like half that social media time, right? Of one day to do this. The reality is this actually doesn't take that much time. It's just hard to do, right? And what you do is get in an undistracted place. If you got a room, if you can put a phone away and put a computer away, and you get this packet of papers that you print out that we're going to give to you. And it walks you through kind of step by step how to do it. I'm going to show you in a minute where to get the packet. Here's what I'm asking you to do today. I'm doing it too. As we end the year here in the next few weeks, as we move towards Christmas, what I would love for us to do is to spend a little time doing this. I want us to schedule this time today. And I know you're looking at me going, Ryan, this is Christmas, man. We should be like warm and fuzzy. Yeah, I like warm and fuzzy, kind of. Right? What I really like is movement. What I want for Christmas for you and me is movement. Those clogs in our lives, I want to see them pulled. Movement can happen. My heart breaks at the idea of you and I being stuck 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, when all it took was an hour, an honest, sheer hour to look at it and to walk into the nakedness of it and say, all right, I'm going to own it. Let's go. Lord, you're with me. You're going to help me. Will you give me the courage to square off and face whatever it is that I haven't had the courage to square off and face off with? I get really excited about seeing that happen in my own life and in yours. That's what I want for you for Christmas. You're like, you're a sick person, Ryan. I know. So here's what I'm asking you to do. Get out that super sweet device you have. Grab it. Go ahead. However you organize your life. Here's what I'd love for you to do is to find a day, pick the time, put it on your calendar right now. An hour, 90 minutes, whatever you're in for. Schedule it. Schedule it. I'm going to ask unapologetically for you to make room in your life for this before the end of the year. If you can do it this week, great. If you need a little more time, a lot of us take time off between Christmas and New Year's. If you need to do that, fine. Find a place to put it and put it in there. I'll do it later. Don't do it later. Do it now. Do it. Stop looking at me and pick up your phone. I love you. Okay, and now I'm going to tell you how to do it. We call this the personal growth plan. If you have a smartphone and you know how to use a QR code, you can put your camera right at that thing, and you'll get a link to download the form right now. If you're sophisticated enough to do that, go ahead and do it. Okay. If you have the app, the Grace Church app, it's at the very top tab on that app. It's also on our website. It's also on our website. If you need us to print out physical copies for you, we can probably pull that off. Right? Let me submit something to you. If you are resisting this, if this is hard for you to schedule, it's probably even more important that you do this. I've been there, man, where there's something that I'm kind of running from and kind of avoiding and kind of don't want to look at. And I know that if I go do this thing that Ryan's talking about, that thing's going to be staring at me. can I just appeal to you? In view of God's mercy, stare right back. You're a child of God. Do not walk in fear. And that do not walk in fear, listen, that's about this. That's about this stuff. It's not about the ways we've been using it culturally. Don't fear, blah, blah, blah. No, it's about this, the emotional, personal thing that you and I don't want to deal with. Use that verse this way, not culturally. Do not fear. Be courageous. Be strong. Okay. Because I'm going to have the band come out, and I'm going to pray for us. And I'm going to ask God to move in our hearts in strong and powerful ways as we make room for him. Father, thank you. God, thank you for being a God who loves us enough to continually move towards us. Lord, thank you that you don't allow us to stay the same. Lord, and even though it's painful for us and emotional for us to stare at ways that we have failed you or harbored unforgiveness or just been stuck, Lord, your grace is so sufficient. Your mercy is unending. You are thrilled and excited to see us awaken to this and to be changed and to be moved, and you long to give us your power in all of it. You don't stand in judgment. You don't wag your finger. You are for us and you are with us. And you prove that with what you did in sending Christ. So, Lord, I pray for myself and for everyone who hears my voice today, that in this little investment of time, that we might walk away different, moved, changed, sparked, catalyzed, awakened to who you are and what you want for us, Lord. Allow us to live as your children, not in fear, but in power and love and self-discipline. It's the spirit that you've given us. Be with us here, Lord.